Reverend Sue Witter. There you go.
We're all still getting used to that one. If you say Reverend Sue, I will likely go. Because it's still new enough for me that it's been 45 years coming, but I was a little slow on the uptick. So thank you for having me. Yes, indeed, I openly admit that I am a fangirl of Greg Boyle, and he is a teacher that I have gone different places in the country to hear speak, to Los Angeles, to San Diego, he actually went down to Tucson once, San Francisco even. But he does travel all over the world, and his message is really an extraordinary message because he is better actually at anybody that I've ever encountered at implementing and walking the talk. He really lives it. So who he is he is the founder of Homeboy Industries in Los Angeles, which is the world's largest gang disassociation and prison reentry program on the planet. And he has been doing this for over 40 years. He has the most loving, open heart. But here's the thing that he has that I think I want to be him when I grow up. Now, I'll be 70 next Sunday, so you think it better be pretty soon. But he has the capacity to lovingly set boundaries. And to me, it's one thing to be loving, and it's another thing to be loving with significant boundaries, so that those boundaries are set with a kindness, with compassion. And his belief is that kindness is really the only strength there is, and that compassion is the answer to most things, and that love really ultimately is the answer. So I have a bunch of Kleenex here with me, so I apologize. For some reason in this weather, my nose decides to run, so if you see me, I'm not sick, and I'm not snorting crack, I promise. You can tell I was an alcohol and drug rehab counselor at some point in my life. So this year, the Centers for Spiritual Living has the global theme for all the centers is rising higher and growing deeper. And that, for me, is the message in most of what I've read about what they've said about the theme, is it's a commitment to both and. You know, it's very easy to go, it's this or it's that. And we get along much better if we can say, it's this, it's that, or something more. It's yes and. It's both. It's more than both. And so it's that when you have that as your theme, you'll come across a lot of spiritual paradoxes. So I'm going to talk about a few of those today. And then at my center, we have our theme is rooted. And it's about being rooted in spiritual practice and knowing that if we want to change our life, that the answer is spiritual practice. But my theme quote for today is indeed from the very introduction of Father Boyle's book. And it is an extraordinary thing. He says, everyone is on, this is what he believes, and it's what Homeboy is founded on, and it's really what he lives. Everyone is unshakably good, no exceptions. And the title, actually the full title of the book is Cherished Belonging, The Healing Power of Love in Divided Times. Now, one thing I like about that particular notion, if you go back in Ernest Holmes' first book that he published in 1919, he talks about the difficult times that we're going through. And every book that you find, one of my favorite books is Eric Butterworth's In the Flow of Life, and he has a whole big thing talking about, and in these difficult times. The truth is that kind of when humans get together, we bump into each other, and it can be difficult. My mentor for years and years, when he described certain things, he said ministerial school for him was like a rock tumbler. and that you just bump into each other and ideas and thoughts until it bumps all the rough edges off of you. True that. So, anyway, the theme quote is, everyone is unshakably good, no exceptions, and we belong to each other, no exceptions. And he says, now, do I think all of our vexing and complex social dilemmas would disappear if we embraced those two notions? And he says, yes, I do. And in the book, he describes doing this at a talk, and he was really startled because the audience laughed. And after they stopped laughing, he said he was really surprised. He said, after they stopped laughing, yes, I do. So he talks a lot about the fact that really, if you break it all down, you boil it all away, everyone is unshakably good, no exceptions. We belong to each other, no exceptions. And that God only loves. So Ernest Holmes says, the insistent and universal desire for self-expression is a divine urge within us, even God himself tapping on the walls of our heart, urging us into a fuller life. And in most practitioners' favorite book, most ministers and practitioners love This Thing Called You. He says, the desire you have to be something, to do something, is a mental echo in your mind of the spirit which already exists within you. A mental echo in your mind. And to me, that's just beautiful to think of it as a mental echo. But if I were going to say my message boils down to one thing today, it would be God just loves. God just loves. I don't personally believe that if something bad happens to me, that God did it, that I'm being punished in some way. I also don't believe that if something good happens to me, that I'm blessed. So I love in football or any sport, and they win, and they'll thank God for being on their side. Well, then does that mean that God didn't like the guys who lose? I don't think so, you know? Now, if you say, I was blessed with some gifts, thank you, God, for that. But God's on my side. So I believe that God doesn't bother with trying to manipulate our lives to make it good or bad, right or wrong, should or shouldn't. God just loves. God just loves. Because if I give God credit for manipulating my life in a way that something happens, then I also have to say if something bad happens that God did that too, and I just don't believe that. So ultimately, the message of cherished belonging is that God, in fact, in general, all of his books, God only loves. So he talks about the fact that he frequently quotes Mother Teresa as saying that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. And the full quote from Mother Teresa is, if we have no peace, it is because we have forgotten that we belong to each other. And he goes on to say, this simple principle seemed to unlock a door for much that ails our country and our world. If there are people living in tents on Main Street, it's because we've forgotten. If there are more and more fentanyl overdoses, suicides, hate crimes, homophobic assaults, election conspiracies, anti-Semitic rants, homicides, massacres in Israel and Palestine, it's because we've forgotten. If only we can land on a common story, it just might propel us to connection and belonging. And he goes on to say, I don't think I'm on death's door, which is humorous. As we all age, I think all of us kind of stop and think that a little bit. He said, but I find myself assessing things I believe as I inch toward that door. I believe the following things. God is in the loving. God is inclusion. Demonizing is always untruth. Demonizing is always untruth. We belong to each other. Separation is an illusion. Tenderness is the highest form of spiritual maturity. Isn't that a delightful thought? He refers to the tender glance of God often in his books. Tenderness. Tenderness. How lovely would it be if we could simply be tender with each other and tender with ourselves? Because I will tell you, for me, I've done a lot of work with Kristen Neff. She's one of the handful of people that I will travel anywhere in the country to go to work with her. She talks about the importance of being able to be kind to yourself and self-compassion. So Father Boyle continues to say, kindness is the only non-delusional response to everything. And that's from an actor, a British actor named George Sanders. Love your neighbor as you'd love your child. We are all unshakably good, and a community of cherished belonging is God's dream come true. So what if we could have that, where we could see and cherish and respect each other and ourselves? It starts with ourselves. And he says, for what it's worth, this book just wants to lure us to embracing God's heart and punto de vista, which is point of view. It proposes a mystical view that perhaps can lift us above those things that keep us apart. Nobody versus anybody. God's dream come true. And poet Amanda Gorman says, our only enemy is that which would make us enemies to each other. This is about learning to love each other, but have that boundary that says, I love you, I respect you, and I'm willing to say no. That's very hard to do. 2 little letters. It's one of the hardest words in the English language for many of us. Some people are rocking out good at it. I happen to be one that has to work at it. So looking and saying, what can I do? How can I change my perspective so that I am willing to see things in a more loving fashion? So in the book, he says, Rumi writes, if the house of the world is dark, then love will find a way to make windows. I love Rumi and the many translations of Rumi's work. But love will make a way to find windows. Ask yourself if you spend time making windows in your world. Love creates the windows. And he says, those transparent panes through which we see beyond the confines of us, windows help us imagine something masayala, which is beyond our fears and crippling anxiety. Meister Eckhart suggests that we need to wipe clean the panes of our lantern so that light can be the strongest. If all of life is a journey of love that ceaselessly installs windows. And sometimes when I'm caught up in the conditions of life, being able to stop and say, because I'd heard that Rumi quote before, am I trying to install a window here, or have I created a door or a wall? That's what love does. That's what being willing to say, can I see what Maya Angelou talks about the fact that we have more in common than we have differences. And the spooky part for me about our DNA is, depending on which researcher you listen to, 95 to 99% of our DNA is the same. Whether you're male, female, black, white, Hispanic, Chinese, tall, short, blue eyes, green eyes, brown eyes, doesn't matter. That our DNA at its base is the same. It's a very small percentage that makes us different. So what am I willing to do to open my heart and see things differently? He talks a lot in the book about walking each other home. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. If we really look at the theme quote that says, we belong to each other. Home is that place in our heart. And in one of the quotes, he refers to Abraham Lincoln, who says, when I do good, I feel good. When I do bad, I feel bad. That's my religion. And that's kind of ours too, isn't that what we teach? When I do good, I feel good. When I do bad, I feel bad. So, do what makes you feel better. But it's important to see that we belong to each other, that it's very easy to get caught up in the circumstances of life and the world, and it's very easy to see our differences, even though really they're pretty small, because everyone wants to be loved, they want to feel safe, they want to feel supported, they want to be loving. But we have different ideas about how to get there. And that's where we get in trouble. My way, your way, as opposed to what the theme for this year for CSL, yes and, both, more than both. To look for those ways to find our common ground, our ability to be kind to each other. And he says, when we do this, we make progress walking with each other home to this wholeness. So, beyond understanding each other, we begin to believe in each other. And that's really the healthy perspective in life. The Tibetan saying says that where you've received love, the most love, that's home. But Father Boyle says, I think loving is home. Loving is nutritious. It feeds the grumbling stomach of our souls. I just love that. Love feeds the grumbling stomach of our soul. Because we desire love. We want to love and be loved. We are hardwired for connection. And loving feeds our soul. And when we see that loving is our home, he says you'll never be homesick again. It's about loving. So it's important to look at questions, I think. And sometimes we ask the wrong questions. So finding the right questions to ask is sometimes a challenge. And one of the things that Parker Palmer says is, don't ask what I've achieved, don't ask if I've achieved my goals. Have I been effective in my work? What should I or shouldn't I have done? Have you been faithful to your values is the question to ask. Is the life I'm living the same as the life that wants to live in me? Let the highest truths and values guide you in everything you do. But the paradox alert with spirituality, he also says, before you tell your life what you intend to do with it, listen for what it intends to do with you. What is that God in you? What is that life that you want to live? So there's also another question I think that's really important, and that is, where do we place our allegiance? And that's a tough one. That's one I have to ask myself sometimes when I'm in the middle. So a man named Paul Hasselbeck says, you don't get a strong life by empowering your weakest point. And Pema Chodron, another one that I have flown all over, literally the country to see. At some point, we need to stop identifying with our weakness and shift our allegiance to our basic goodness. It is highly beneficial to understand that our limitations are not absolute and monolithic, but relative and removable. The wisdom of Buddha nature, which is the Christ consciousness from her teaching, is available to us at any time. At any time. Where do we put our allegiance? You know, people talk a lot about faith, and I really believe that we all have enough faith. Just where do we put it? Do you put your faith with the highest and best in people? Do you put your faith that things are going to turn to bad? Not the thought my brain was trying to come up with another word for. Where do you put your faith? That's really the question. It's not that we need more faith. We just need to shift the focus of our faith. Because we all have enough faith. Most of us, if we have a problem with faith, it's because we've put it somewhere else. We've put it somewhere other than the highest and best, and that God wants only the best for me, that the universe conspires to bring me our good. So one of the things that Father Boyle talks about this in all of his books, he says, sometimes our God that we currently think about is tiny. And he even refers to it at times as we've settled for a puny God. And that God is so much bigger if we just open up. And in his book prior to this one, he talks about one of my favorite things in the book. He talks about if you have a punishing God, he says, wrong God. If you have, what number is that? Because I can't see that. Time's up. All right. Well, so there we go. So no, we got to try to behave. But he said, well, that's never been my gift, but I'll try. So he talks about the fact that we can choose to see a loving God. We can choose to see each other in a more loving way. And if we can do that, we create a community of cherished belonging. We create a community of love. And Jesus says you're the light of the world. It doesn't say, if you're good enough, you'll be the light of the world. If you behave properly, you'll be the light of the world. If you comply with whatever it is you think you should comply with, you're the light of the world. It says, no, you're the light of the world. It isn't contingent on our behavior. So, real quickly, there's one thing I really do feel that I really do want to talk about. Brene Brown talks about 3 things that can't be changed. She says the most dangerous stories we make up are the narratives that diminish our inherent worthiness. We must reclaim the truth about our lovability, divinity, and creativity. And she says this about our lovability, that believing that we're not enough and that we're unlovable is the most dangerous conspiracy theory of all. If there's one thing I've learned over the past, in this book, it had been 13 years, it's more now, it's this. Just because someone isn't willing or able to love us does not mean we're unlovable. She talks about our divinity as being unchangeable. And she says our faith narratives must be protected, and we must remember that no person is ordained to judge our divinity or to write our own spiritual worthiness. And the last one is creativity and ability. And about that, she says, just because we didn't measure up to some standard of achievement doesn't mean that we don't possess gifts and talents that only we can bring to the world. Only we can bring to the world. Just because someone failed to see the value in what we can create or achieve doesn't change its worth or ours. And so for me, that's a big piece of learning to create a community of cherished belonging, a community where we belong to each other, to know that open-mindedness is the practice of thinking with love. So I will encourage you to, I really will encourage you to get this book. It is so filled with great stuff that I could talk forever, and I promise I won't. I promise. But there's another really good book that I use often. It's by Danielle Laporte, and it's called How to Be Loving as our heart is breaking open and our world is waking up. And in it, on one page, she just has in huge letters 9 times, love it all. Love it all. Love it all. Because that is what matters. Love it all. So I'm going to do one last thing real quickly. I promise, my last one. So the theme quote, everyone is unshakably good, no exceptions. We belong to each other, no exceptions. Our job to make that happen is to commit to loving kindness, unshakable goodness, and walking ourselves and each other home. There's a Maori bishop named John Tamahiri, and he speaks of kaupapa, would be how I guess you'd say it. If you hold up a high purpose, people unify. Hold a high thought about ourselves, about each other, about the world. In a time when we are in extraordinary times, hold that high thought. And how do we do that? Be clear on our core values and align with those, and be kind to ourselves when we don't. Tell the truth about how we behave, and to be kind to yourself also about that. To do what we must to become aware of how we feel, and when we're not in alignment, always shift to your core values. Set intentions based on those values for our soul deep desires, and then commit. Ask yourself these questions. Does this support me in seeing love and loving as my home? Does it help me remember that we belong to each other? Does this help me shift from a feeling-centered life to a heart-centered life? Does this help me practice thinking with love? Does this help me feel everything with more love? To love no matter what. Does this move me closer or farther away from my heart's desire of joy and love? Does it move me towards truth? Does it move me toward living in alignment? Does it help me remember that the truth about my lovability, my divinity, and my creativity are always good? Love it all. So that's my ask for you all, to carry that with you in your heart. Love it all. Love it all. Love it all. Thank you. So do you do a prayer? Yeah. All right. So if you will, just take a deep breath. Open your hearts, open your minds, and let your very soul expand, open, soften. We think that sometimes closing our heart is possible. It's not. We close our mind, but our heart is always open, always ready for love, always ready to be loved. So allow that space in your heart, in your very soul, to soften, to let your mind have all of the notions fall away that stand between it and viewing the world as being unshakably good and belonging to each other and walking each other home. And give thanks. Give thanks for this extraordinary philosophy that pulls us to believe in greater things. It pulls us to know the truth of who we are. It pulls us to be accountable for our choices. It pulls us to the knowledge that we are always at choice, and that anything that's happening in our life today can be changed with a new choice. So I give thanks knowing that as we move forward, we do so with open hearts, with open minds, with seeing in a new way, with seeing loving kindness, with seeing compassionately, with seeing kinship and belonging as the answer. And knowing that no matter what, I am worthy of love and belonging. And each of us is worthy of love and belonging. At our very core, we are unshakably good. That God is unshakably good, that we are connected unshakably to that divine energy. So I give thanks, knowing that in this moment and in every moment, it is true that it that the divinity of who I am is unshakable, unbreakable, and unstoppable. So I give thanks. I release our time together out into the synchronicity that is both love and law, knowing that the universe has already said yes. And so it is. Thank you.